A Victorian magistrate has set a precedent which is giving the Australian Taxation Office heartburn, and the appeal against Judge Michael O'Connell's decision will be being watched by the Australian government, as well as by Bitcoin and cryptocurrency enthusiasts around Australia and indeed around the world. This story starts out sounding like the plot of a B-grade thriller movie. A corrupt cop gets caught with drugs and millions of dollars in digital currency, which he has stolen from the drug smugglers that it was his job to bust. But instead of a climax filled with breathless chase sequences and a nail-biting shootout, this movie ends up in court with grown adults in wigs arguing over whether information can be classified as property, and if indeed it is property, exactly what kind of property is it? It's safe to say that this story won't be turned into a Hollywood thriller anytime soon, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't pay attention, because it is both kind of hilarious, but also the implications of the decisions being made are enormous for those of us who believe in freedom and understand the role of digital money and especially Bitcoin. My name is Topher. This is the Topher Project, and I help busy people like you to keep up with the world as it changes around us. Now, I am 100% viewer supported, so please head over to goodpeoplebreakbadlaws.com and grab a copy of my books, my DVDs, t-shirts, hoodies, and check out my Getting Your Head in the Game masterclass. Now, cryptocurrencies are a game-changing technology, and I witnessed firsthand just how much Bitcoin can actually save lives, literally, while I was in Venezuela in 2015. And yes, I know I talk about Venezuela a lot, but honestly, it was like being simultaneously in the past and in our future. And if you ignore my Venezuela warnings, well, feel free to do so, but you do so at your own peril. Among many things that I learnt while I was there was the importance and power of giving people an alternative currency to use when their own currency is collapsing. The Venezuelan bolivar was inflating at tens of thousands of % per annum, grinding the whole country deeper into poverty. As a result, Venezuela had at that time, in 2015, the highest per capita adoption of Bitcoin out of anywhere in the world. Or at least that's what I was told. So, whilst I can't verify that number, I can tell you that I personally met many people in Venezuela who had ported their entire lives across to Bitcoin and almost never dealt in bolivars or even in US dollars anymore. Now, these were admittedly mostly small business owners who were able to provide services online. And thanks to the wonders of the internet, they were earning in Bitcoin, paying their staff in Bitcoin, buying and selling from each other in Bitcoin. And whenever actual bolivars or US dollars were needed, there is a booming black market to trade with at whatever the going exchange rate was at the time. The point of it all was that while they were holding Bitcoin, they weren't losing value like what the bolivar was. And whilst Bitcoin can be volatile, that is nothing compared to the certainty that the bolivar is going to lose most of its value every month, and then lose most of the value that was left the month after, and so on every month. Now, using Bitcoin was difficult. It can be slow to transact. It can be challenging as you wait for the next block to be minted. Finding people to trade with can be limiting, not to mention the challenges of exchanging Bitcoin for another currency, which you do have to do from time to time. And all of that is why the adoption of Bitcoin for everyday business in relatively prosperous countries like ours is comparatively slow. But in a place like Venezuela, the upsides of Bitcoin far outweighed the downsides, and Bitcoin became a lifesaver, literally. Which means, if I'm right about the future of Australia, then cryptocurrencies generally, and in my personal opinion, Bitcoin specifically, is going to play an important role in many of our lives as a way of storing value and as a way of continuing to trade, even as there is ever-increasing restrictions on capital controls, manipulated inflation figures, and artificial exchange rates, which will be taking over the Australian dollar sooner or later. So, that's the context. Cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin matter. You can complain that they have no intrinsic value, and you're correct, but that's also true of every fiat currency. But with Bitcoin being decentralized and finite, without a reserve bank to manipulate it, and also with it being globally tradable without needing permission from a government or from a bank or from any institution, Bitcoin should have a place in every single one of our lives. At the very least, we need to understand it and know how to use it, even if we don't want to keep it as a store long term. That's up to you. So, back to this court case. Until now, Bitcoin was treated by the Australian Taxation Office the same way that houses or shares or gold or silver are treated. Yeah, you can buy it, you can sell it, but if it goes up in value and you sell it for a profit, in other words, if it gains capital value while you're holding it, then you will have to pay capital gains tax. Now, of course, we can debate whether taxes should exist. Spoiler alert, they shouldn't, but that's not productive for our purposes today. I'm just describing to you what the current state of play in Australia was. Bitcoin was treated the same way that shares are. End of story. But remember the lawyers in wigs arguing about whether or not information was property and what kind of property it was? Well, things got kind of interesting in this court case because this former Australian Federal Police officer who stole those bitcoins, he tried to argue that they are not property because they're just information and therefore they couldn't be stolen. Yeah, that is his argument. His lawyers tried to argue that because it was just information, which is correct, they tried to argue that therefore you can't steal it, which I'll be careful what I say because this is the subject of an ongoing appeal. But one point I'll immediately make in opposition to that claim is that the information in question that makes a Bitcoin, it's exclusive, i.e. you can't just copy that information and now two people have it. That's kind of the whole point of the crypto part of cryptocurrency. So even if they could prove that information is not property, which is still ambitious to put it mildly, I think they would struggle to argue that exclusive, non-replicable information that has an established market and globally agreed value is still just information and therefore not property. Bitcoin and just information are not necessarily the same thing. And yes, these are the kinds of arguments that grown-ups in wigs spent a long time having. But once they'd all had their say, the judge ruled something unexpected. That Bitcoin isn't just a form of property, i.e. he rejected this "it's just information and therefore you can't steal it" argument. He ruled it's not just property, it's actually a form of currency, which means therefore that it is not the same as shares or bonds or real estate or gold and silver from a capital gains tax perspective. What this means in practice is that this judge has just ruled that Bitcoin is exempt from capital gains tax. Now, this decision is being appealed. It appears that our allegedly corrupt cop is pretty determined to prove that Bitcoins are not property, and therefore he did nothing wrong when he took a bunch of them. Like I said, it's an ambitious plan, in my opinion, but hey, you got to respect the hustle. But if this reclassification of Bitcoin as not merely property but actually as currency holds up on appeal, it will have some significant implications for the ATO and the budget, to the tune of maybe $1 billion in capital gains tax, which the government will have to repay. But honestly, that is pretty small beer compared to the implications such a decision would have on the way Bitcoin can be used and integrated into the Australian economy going forward. If Bitcoin does indeed become legally a form of cash in Australia, then the paperwork and tax implications are vastly simplified. And I think many more people and I think many more companies will become much more open to the idea of holding Bitcoin as a hedge against inflation and indeed open to using Bitcoin for the purposes of doing everyday business. Now, I must hasten to stress that our financial situation here in Australia is nowhere near as dire as it was in Venezuela. So I'm not suggesting that we're about to see the adoption rates of Bitcoin in Australia go as high as what I saw when I was in Venezuela. And it must also be stressed that the appeals over this decision might go all the way to the High Court and could take years to settle. So whatever the impact of this decision is, it won't be vast and it is still probably a few years away. But I think it will be important and we should all watch this space because this judge might have accidentally turned Australia not so much into a Bitcoin tax haven. Australia is most definitely not a tax haven for anyone. But this judge may well have accelerated the adoption and integration of Bitcoin into the Australian economy and may inadvertently have given every Australian better access to what I believe is one of the most important financial tools for surviving in a failing economy. Now, I am not a financial advisor and I am not telling you what to do or indeed that you should do anything. But I am suggesting that you might want to pay attention to this story and to this court case. And of course, I will bring you updates to help keep you up to date as future chapters of this B-grade courtroom drama unfold. My name is Topher Field, this is the Topher Project, and I am 100% viewer supported. I do make a little bit from YouTube ads on videos like this one, which aren't too spicy, so I'm allowed to run ads on these. But on my spicier stories, and I've had a few of those recently, particularly involving the you-know-what, I can't even put ads on some of those videos. Essentially, YouTube is making me pay, costing me money for the privilege of bringing you those stories that matter. Which means that if you appreciate me keeping you up to date and bringing you the stories that matter with perspectives which empower you, then I really need your help to keep going. Head over to goodpeoplebreakbadlaws.com, grab my books, DVDs, t-shirts and hoodies, as well as my online masterclass, Getting Your Head in the Game. And for those who just want to support my work, and maybe you've already got my books and my merch, please head to topherfield.net. And there you will find the Buy Me a Coffee button where you can support my work directly. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. Maybe think about dusting off that Bitcoin wallet and see if you can start using it somewhere. In the meantime, please like, subscribe, comment, share, check out this related video which YouTube thinks that you will enjoy as well. And of course, as always, stay free.